Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Teaching Matters. You know, when we think about the life of a teacher, there's a lot of stressors that are put on them, and it leads to burnout. Just looking at the act of grading, we know that teachers, by and large, are spending 10 plus hours a week, if not even much more than that, grading papers and grading assignments. And that's on top of the time that they're spending in the room. A lot of that happens at night when they're at home. It's something that's a part of the job. We all know that going into it, but it's also something that certainly adds to the stress of being in teaching. The National Education Association defines teacher burnout as a condition in which an educator is exhausted their personal and professional resources that's necessary to do the job. And that's something that affects a lot of teachers, as we know. We know that in our profession, there are a lot of teachers that burn out, especially in those first 3 years in trying to learn the day-to-day tasks of what it means to actually be a teacher. And sometimes that burnout doesn't end, and that becomes very hard for teachers to deal with. We also know that teachers are more than twice as likely to be stressed as other working adults, even compared to professions like the medical profession, where you would assume that there's a ton of stress. So with all of that in mind, obviously anything that we can do to try to look for ways to reduce the stressors on teachers, that's an important question. And are there tools that teachers can use that reduce some of those burdens on a day-to-day task basis that makes the job a little bit easier and lets them spend time on the parts of the job that brings them more joy? That's the topic we'll be talking about on today's Teaching Matters.
Welcome to Teaching Matters, a podcast exploring all things teaching and learning. Teaching Matters is produced by NPR affiliate WOUB Public Media in Athens, Ohio. And here is your host, Dr. Scott Titsworth, Dean of the Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University.
Joining me today is Mike Guido. He is a secondary special education teacher at Victor Central School District in New York, which is located north of the Finger Lake region and just southeast of Rochester, generally speaking. Mike is also the CEO and co-founder of A+Minds, an AI-powered platform using customized rubrics that allow students to gain evidence-based feedback while also reducing the processing and paperwork time for teachers. Mike, thanks so much for your time after a busy teaching day, I'm sure. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit.
I'm happy to be on the show.
So I think to start with, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, you know, we've had people on really all season now talking about different elements of AI. And what's unique about you is that you are in the tech ed space. You have a platform that you're going to be talking about, but you're also a practicing teacher. Can you kind of talk about your background, sort of what led you to where you're at in your career right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I originally went to St. Lawrence University to play football and get a degree in government. I had jostled around with a couple of things, thinking about becoming a lawyer, maybe becoming a football coach. And as I got older and more towards my senior year, I just felt I had a calling to teaching. And so put it in place, and I decided to apply to a graduate program at Nazareth University, which took me out to Rochester. After I graduated, I followed my fiance out here, and we kind of started to set out roots. I became a building sub at Victor Central School Districts and really found a passion with special ed, something that I hadn't planned so much for. I originally was going to go strictly for social studies, and I found myself really enjoying being a special education teacher, specifically working in self-contained classrooms. Mm-hmm. And so for the last 3 years, I've been a special education teacher here in Victor, New York.
What is it about special education that really drew you into it? I mean, that is a field where sometimes people know exactly what they're getting into. It sounds like you found it. What is it that draws you to that?
Well, it was interesting. While I was a sub, I was doing different things. And one of the things I wanted to do more than anything was get that experience and learn how to become a teacher. And one of the jobs that was offered to me was to be an aide with a student as a one-on-one. And, you know, I actually reached out and wanted to do it because I felt like getting in the same classroom every day would help me kind of learn how to work on not only my classroom management, but also how to work with more challenging students on a daily basis. And mm-hmm. I found a really large passion because I think that it's a really beautiful thing when you're able to connect with a student who maybe hasn't been able to connect with so many other adults, and you're able to show compassion and patience and really foster a connection with a student who maybe doesn't always get that throughout their educational experience. So I found a lot of joy in that.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about Victor. I know it's close to Rochester, but
Mhm.
it's a village by itself. What type of district do you work in?
Yeah, so the district itself, I would say, is affluent and predominantly white. I would say that
Mhm.
my demographic looks a little bit different. There's definitely a mix of English language learners, um, and a diverse group of students. I would say that it's a school that has a high culture on sports, which has been enjoyable for me. I do coach varsity football at the school. I have a background playing football in college. But overall, I feel like I've learned so much from the school. There's a lot of really, really great educators there, specifically in the special education field.
How big of a district is it?
There's about 300 kids per grade.
Yeah. Okay. So, kind of switching gears, in addition to being a classroom teacher in spec ed, you obviously are a CEO and co-founder of an ed tech company. Can you tell me the origin story of how A Plus Minds was founded and, sort of what led you down that path?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my first year teaching, I was co-teaching with now a very good friend of mine, Brian Kavanaugh. And one of the things that he complained about more than anything, he talked about loving his job, but he really did not like grading essays, specifically the enduring issues essays that come with the Global Nine curriculum. And so my best friend, who I met when we were back in preschool, now works in the tech field, and I'm talking to him on the phone, and we've always tried different businesses here and there, but I was talking to him about how I felt like AI could make this a reality with how it's progressing. And, he's listening to me and he's kind of like, yeah, I can do that. And so I
Mhm.
said, really? And he said, yeah. And so we started to build it out from there. And I think one of the things that makes us a really interesting company, and one of the ways that I know will continue to progress in a way that's positive to teachers, is like you said, I am one. I'm in the field on a daily basis. I feel I'm able to capture what is needed by teachers because I know what I need on a daily basis. And I try to build out what I think would truly be helpful to me.
In terms of the platform A Plus Minds itself, one of the features that I read about on your website and in some of the other materials I was looking at is that you explicitly allow teachers to do customized rubrics. That
Mhm.
might be self-obvious to everyone listening to this, but why is that so important on a platform like this?
Well, originally we were going back and forth on whether or not teachers should have full autonomy and we should have no rubrics built in. But one of the things that I felt was important was that the ease of use was available for everyone.
Hmm.
So I wanted to make sure that my coworkers from age 20 to age 55 were going to be able to access this and use it positively for themselves. So I wanted to build in 8 to 10 rubrics that someone could use at any point and they could quickly upload papers and grade them. But like you mentioned, I also wanted to give the autonomy to build out a rubric. Today, I was talking to a teacher who wanted to use my platform, but he didn't want to use it in the traditional way of fully grading out this paper. What he wanted to look at more than anything was the grammar that his students were using specifically. And so I sat with him and talked to him about how to specifically build out this rubric that was going to check for his grammar parameters. So I think one of the things that's really cool about it is you can use this tool in whatever way you need. And so while if you need it to be quick and you're just looking for quick feedback, you want to put a bunch of papers in and get a grade for them, that's available to you. If you want to dive in and learn how to use this AI tool as in a way that is sufficient to your classroom and makes your life easier, I think that option is also available, which is something I'm really proud of.
Based upon your experience, in working on the platform and, I'm sure talking to people who've used it, are there certain types of assignments that platforms like this are ideally suited for? And the context behind that question is, like, for example, when I teach, I like to do daily reflections at the end of a class period that students do every day. Sometimes that's handwritten. Sometimes I'll say you have until midnight to turn in, just sort of depending upon the complexity of the class. And then there's other types of assignments like the traditional end of term big papers, right? For
Mhm.
an AI platform, maybe a better way to phrase this, Mike, is if I'm a teacher, is it worth my time to use the platform for those small daily things, or is it better suited for those big assignments? Or is the answer, this is why you use a platform like this to do all of that?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I think I would definitely lean towards it's a great platform to do all of that. And the reason I say that is because of that other feature we have, which is the student progress. And that's really built out of my special education background. And so what that does, there's it's kind of two layers. So one is that if I run an individual assignment, I can then run an assessment on that, and that'll be all the students who have submitted a paper for that. I get a breakdown on it. So for me as a teacher, I get to look at what did my class do well, what did they struggle with, and that can help me shape my next lesson. So if I'm doing a quick assignment, like you're saying, or a formative assessment that's building towards a summative assessment, I'm going to be able to take that data and my next lesson, I might not have time to go through 30 papers for all four of my classes. But what I can do is look at this feedback and it can help me structure my next lesson so it's effectively hitting what my students weren't getting before. And I think that's a big target of our tool is we're not trying to replace teachers. However, we are trying to save them time so that they're able to go home to their family, spend time with their kids, and not have to work till 6 o'clock at night. And yet they can still give students what they need by giving them acceptable feedback in a timely manner. And along with that, I think those long-term assignments are really helpful as well, because not only does it give you feedback and a grade, which is all that good stuff, but I think it also promotes equity in the sense that students know they're being graded fairly. You can double check yourself, because I think as teachers, we can also admit that there are times where we have human interactions with kids. There are human elements that go into grading. If a kid has worked extremely hard and stayed after school with us for 2 weeks straight to finish a final paper, that's going to factor into our grading a little bit. And so I think it's also really helpful to see, what does the AI think? How much did I raise that grade because that student stayed after with me for 2 weeks? Or inversely, did I take off too many points from that kid because he messes around in my class a little too much and it's driving me a little insane? So I think it's a nice bias checker for us as well.
Well, I mean, I totally get the fact that when I'm grading a paper, I may have a relationship with the student, either good or bad, that, even implicitly could be influencing that. I can also tell you, and I'll bet you can empathize with this, that how you grade the 20th paper when you're at the end of the stack is different than how you grade the first paper at the beginning. So
absolutely it is. That fatigue sets in, and maybe some things you were caring about in that first paper don't bug you so much.
Yeah. You stop fighting over the Oxford comma and things like that when you get to the end. So the point you made about a teacher being able to use the quick feedback, not only for the benefit of the student, but for her or him to reflect on where the class is at. Not to put you on a spot, but are there any examples of that you've seen, take place where a teacher was able to pivot because they saw something in the data?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll use some personal examples. So having students write a memoir, being able to look through all their papers really quick, it really helped me when I'm working one-on-one with my students during a support block, because I was able to go in and look at the 3 things that I thought that they were missing the most based on the feedback I was given. And so I didn't have to spend that extra. So for 4 students, that extra 20 minutes of that block, I was able to use sitting down with each kid one-on-one to give them assistance. And it might look like giving that kid 10 minutes instead of 5 minutes, but that can go a really long way in a kid's day in terms of confidence, how they feel about the paper, the relationship you've built with them. And then one more feature I wanted to add on to that as well is, in that same vein, the way that I can run every single paper and inform my class, I can also do that for a singular student as I get more and more papers. And that was also built out of my special ed lens of writing academic preps for students. So like that writing preps. As a special education teacher, I typically try to include at least 2 positives in one area for improvement. And this kind of helps get that whole scale view of all the writing the student's done. Very similar to what you're going to do when you're writing an academic prep.
Yeah. When you've used this, have you found examples where the AI tool has identified things that surprised you as a teacher that maybe you wouldn't have caught or that you wouldn't have zeroed in on, but all of a sudden the AI makes you as a teacher, it causes you to be more reflective on how people are engaging your assignments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I always need to improve the most is my grammar. And so seeing little grammar mistakes that maybe I didn't catch the first time because I wasn't being as astute from a class perspective, I think you kind of mentioned the Oxford comma, but like having a lesson explicitly teaching the Oxford comma after we wrote our first paper, because I see so many students don't truly understand when it's necessary and when it isn't.
Which is debatable.
True.
So you've talked about benefits for, the teacher. To kind of zero in on that, how does that affect sort of your grading practices? So if one of the premises is that using a tool like this can do two important things. It can make you more efficient in your grading from a personal time standpoint, and more effective in your grading. How have you seen the time part play out in terms of speeding up your process?
Oh, I think that's a great point. I think overall, let's say a 5-page paper, you're going to spend at least 20 minutes reading that. And so it's not taking away from when you go and you give that final grade to the paper, you are going to have to read through, you are going to have to be really careful in how you take your notes and how you grade it. But it's more of the long-term process that goes along with that from my lens. Because like I said, we're not trying to replace teachers. We're not trying to get rid of them grading, but we are trying to allow them to not spend their time doing so much mundane reading and work with students more. And so like a specific example, like you said, in my class of 20, I was able to run 10 papers that would have taken me somewhere between 50 to 80 minutes to read. And I was able to sit down with all of my students in that block instead.
You said a couple times, but it's the question that will be in a lot of people's minds as they ponder the use of AI in situations like this. You said a couple times you're not wanting to replace the teacher, and I believe you in saying that. How do you do that? Like when the student gets, like I haven't been able to see the output from your website, but when a student gets a paper back, are they seeing this is a comment from Michael, and this is a comment from the AI? Are they seeing that when they look at the papers, or is it all sort of, put together? And then, how do you as a software developer, sort of maintain the preeminence of the teacher, the human behind the grade?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, right now we don't have students using our website at all. So this would be strictly a teacher tool. And that's mostly to protect personal identifying information for the students and make sure that we are EdLaw 2D compliant and FERPA compliant and things like that. So data privacy has been a big part of what we've practiced, and making sure that you can trust your data with us and that it's not going anywhere. We're not selling it to anyone. And then along with that, the second part of that question would be, can you repeat that second question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what I asked. So how is it that, so I think you mainly answered both questions, because if students aren't getting on the website, they wouldn't see a difference in AI. If I'm a teacher, so let me rephrase the question this way. If I'm a teacher and I start using your platform, but I firmly believe that I want my students to understand that it's really a human that's processing this using some additional tools, what's the best practice for me to be able to use that with my students so that I can give them the feedback that integrates the AI, but gives them and their parents and other people in the district confidence that it's really me making the decisions at the end of the day, but I'm being informed by this other information that's being, sort of given to the assignment. Does that make sense as a question?
It does. And to your point, some of the most skeptical teachers that I've talked to, one of their biggest concerns is if they're using AI to grade and the students are using AI to write their papers, kind of what are we doing here aspect. And I think that's valid, but I think in the same vein, we as teachers have to uphold a standard, and your reputation and how you treat students and how you grade should speak for itself. And when you maintain that ethical grading nature, and I don't see it to be any different from taking theory out of a book and letting that theory kind of, I know one of the big things has been grading for equity. So I think if you used a theory from that, it's in the back of your mind and you're letting maybe some of the practices that have influenced you go into your grading. I think it's very similar, because at the end of the day, what you are putting out into the world is going to come from your brain. And I don't know if that's a great answer to that question, but I think at the end of the day, that is going to be one of the largest criticisms people have, and how we're going to continue to navigate that kind of goes to the teacher and how you speak to your students, why you talk to them about why it's important for you to develop these skills. Yes, you should learn how to use AI, but you also have to be able to write coherent sentences. You have to be able to do these things without using that technology.
I think it's a fair answer. And, when I'm having conversations about this, of course, I'm in higher ed, but I think the principle that you're talking about is the same. When I'm talking about this issue with both faculty and then also students, because I think we're all having to be upfront with each other about AI because it's influencing so many things. When AI first sort of popped out, about 2.5 years ago now, when, Chat GPT first went public and everyone was like, what, I, there were natural reactions of, we have to ban this because of, the way it's going to influence classes. And then as more and more generative AI tools came into play, especially going into the visual realm and the creative realm, we have to ban generative AI because it's going to take creativity out of the curriculum. The problem is that, if you say you're going to start banning things, first of all, that never works. But, what do you do if they're using, Google Docs or Microsoft Word? Well, I mean, the spell checker and the grammar checker are versions of AI now. And if you're using, with people that do photography, if you're using Photoshop and you use certain plugins to make your image clearer, well, that's really an AI algorithm that's doing that. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, AI is baked into so many things that the natural, I guess, response to say we shouldn't be using AI, it's really hard to take that definitive of a stance. Whereas what you're saying is you have ethics as a grader that goes into how you give feedback to students. And that's just another tool that you have. And I think that's a fair answer. So,
yeah. And I think along with that, I think we have to teach our students how to use AI responsibly.
yeah.
I think if you looked at someone 20 years ago and you told them not to use Google, and you think about that in retrospect, it just seems a little bit silly. So I think that learning how to use AI for teachers as well, those who don't use AI will be left behind. And we need to continue to figure out how to use this responsibly and ethically and continue to move forward and be transparent with our students, like you said.
Yeah, especially if the end result is the students are getting better information on how to improve, and the teacher hopefully is able to spend more time having authentic conversations with students about their improvement rather than dreading the task of, doing, I don't want to say the mundane parts of grading, but there are parts of grading that is very formulaic in what you're doing when you're checking grammar. And of course, we can all get better at that. I agree with you. I'm like that as well. But, there are certain things that AI can do for us that frees up time that could be more productively used elsewhere. I totally agree with that. From sort of asking a bit more technical question. So if I'm a teacher using this and I have these assignments, I noticed on your website that it's integrated into Google. So like, what does it look like if I'm a teacher and I get in 20 assignments? Can you kind of talk through what that looks like from a ease of use standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. This was one of the things that I felt had to be in the program no matter what. I know how much that Google Classroom is baked into almost every classroom around the country. And I know there's a couple other methods that can be used, but I think Google is far and away the most popular. And so if you sign in with Google through our website, and you go in and you start grading an assignment, you can import your Google Classroom, and right away, every single classroom that you are actively a teacher in will pop up. All you have to do is select it. You then click on that class and it takes you to the next window where you can again open up this little button that says Open Google Classroom, and every single assignment that you've posted throughout the year will pop up. You click on it, select what rubric you want, and it takes you to your next window. And from there, you can launch our picker and put in as many students as you want. And so I'm able to do this. Obviously, I'm pretty comfortable with the program at this point, but I can add a Google Classroom, select an assignment, a rubric, upload all my students, and grade a paper in under a minute. So this is a process that is extremely fast. And as people become more comfortable with it, they're only going to be able to grade faster and faster. And like I said, then you become a little bit more comfortable and you build out your own rubrics. You shape this as a tool that's always working for you and making you a better grader, saving you some time, making you less burned out so you're able to work with students a little more. You got a better work-life balance.
When your A+Minds app does its job, what does it look like from my side as a teacher? Am I seeing, does it look sort of like the track changes boxes that you would see in a Google Doc or a Word doc, or, how does it come in?
Good question. So there'll be the students, whatever they submitted the paper as. So if you'd like them to submit as their student name, they can do that. So you can organize it. If you want them to be anonymous, you can also have them submit it as just the title of their paper or something of that notion. You could do a number system. And then you would hit grade this upload, and then you have 4 different choices. You can view the text to make sure that the student actually put in a piece of text, as well as to, give it a quick glance over to make sure that this is what you wanted the student to submit. There is an AI checker. So we have a low, medium, or high scale rating, and that tells you whether or not the student used AI to support their writing. And then you can get the view detailed feedback, which is going to be the rubric, the categories broken down, and then the score that they got versus the total score and the reasoning behind that. I think I said there was four. That fourth button would be the grade this upload button.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I would assume the teacher would be able to look at that evaluation, especially the score, and override that if they want to go in a different direction.
Absolutely.
And that sort of thing.
There actually is one more feature I built out on the student progress section, that section I was telling you about that breaks down all your classes. So you can not only get data from there, so standard deviation, how your classes are doing by assignment, things like that. There's also a button I put in that is a bell curve grader instead. Because one of the things I did notice is, as a grade school teacher, 6 through 12, if you're teaching sixth graders, GPT is going to grade them a little more harshly than you likely would, as opposed to if you're grading 12th graders. So I wanted to build in this bell curve feature. So if you wanted to go grade your students with this app, it would also give you a little bit more reflective rather than just in a vacuum as a writer.
Yeah, interesting. This is also a technical question, and I'm not going to ask you to give away company secrets, but like when I think about like AI tools like ChatGPT, they're huge. I mean, they're built literally on large language models. And then when I think about that in relation to my classroom, on a very basic level, like when I teach public speaking, for example, which is, let's just assume it was an essay, maybe for ease of this example, I want them to be able to write an intelligent argument using evidence. And so when I grade them, for instance, one of the things that I grade them on is when they make a claim that they have some sort of independent verified evidence that goes into that. So with all that set up in mind, how does ChatGPT or a language model built on these millions of texts come in and all of a sudden say, Michael did a pretty good job on, making that argument and using evidence to support it, so he gets a 10 out of 10 on that reflection piece or whatever. Like, I just find that fascinating, that it does that. I don't know if there's any way that you can respond to that scenario, but I think that's interesting that, we can take an LLM that's built for anything and everything and then have it work in a very specific circumstance that's important for what I'm teaching in my class.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of those ideas where as AI gets better, it's only going to get better at fact checking those things. And right now I would say it's pretty good at it, but I wouldn't trust it 100%.
Yeah.
But I think about where we were a year ago and what it was able to do, and even what our app looked like when we first built it out 9 months ago or so, and what it looks like now, and how much OpenAI and Grok and Gemini and all these things have improved. And I think that's where we as a company as well, we continue to look at what's the best model, and we're always willing to adapt and change to what we need to do, because I think those are things that are important to us, and we're always trying to look to see what model fits us best.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my alums who has been really into AI even for longer than the obvious time, like a decade ago, he was telling me about it, and like, that's an engineering thing, it's not a communication thing. And well, he proved me wrong, but his phrase, like what you're saying, is that the AI that you're working with right now is the worst that you will ever encounter, and that what will happen in just a few years will make that look like it was an infant, and it's true. I mean, even just thinking over what the last 6 months, how much it has changed, and the capabilities they're able to do with it. When another practical question. So I'm a teacher, and, just thinking about the individual teacher at this point, I'm totally buying into how this is a good tool for my classroom. What does the onboarding process look like for me? In other words, what is the upfront time commitment? Is it one of these things where there's so much time at the beginning that it can be a hurdle to actually doing it well, because I may be doing that during the summer when I really want to be on the lake, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, but that was one of the things that I had in mind more than anything, is I wanted people to open up this app and upload a paper under 5 minutes, no matter what their age, no matter what their technological skills were. And so one of the things I worked hard to do is make sure that this was accessible as possible. So I think that anyone could open this up, and as long as you have papers ready to grade, you
Mm-hmm.
are able to submit a paper and get a grade based on one of those pre-selected rubrics. I would go as far as to say in under 5 minutes.
Well,
However, I think, like with any AI tool, you get better with time. And the more you become comfortable with this program, the more you're going to be able to figure out how to use it to an effective measure. So I think to answer your question, anybody can access it right away. There's a very, very low learning curve. And if looking for it, we have things like tutorials. And even if
mm-hmm.
you want to reach out to me on Facebook or Twitter, I'd be more than happy to sit down with anybody one
Yeah.
on one. But I think with time, you just get better at the app and you
Yeah.
find more ways to explore it and to save you time and become an expert with AI.
Yeah. Is this, I mean, I think I know how you're going to answer this question. Is this an app that is scaled for both individual instructors who want to add this to their repertoire, as well as scaling up to like an entire school building or an entire district?
Yeah, so we have both available. If a school district did contact us and they wanted to learn more, one of the things that we talk about with them is how we have admin level views. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of like we're talking about for the teacher to be able to look through individual classes and look at score breakdown. We would also have an admin who would be able to do this. And one of the things we're looking to continue building out this summer is building in standards. And so an admin being able to check, are these teachers improving writing throughout the year, almost like a Khan Academy with math. But
Mm-hmm.
along with that, are they also hitting the standards that we want to see? Are, in my case in New York State, are they prepared to take the regents?
Right.
Okay, our writing scores were a little lower. Using this app, were we able to hit this many standards and improve our writing to prepare better for the regents this upcoming
Mm-hmm.
year?
Types of assignments. So we've talked almost exclusively about sort of like a written text. Have you ventured into other types of assignments that this tool might be effectively used for?
So I have a little bit, and I don't teach science. One of the things I've been really interested in is if it could accurately do like a science lab that has answers that are correct. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that would be based around what the teacher's looking for out of it. So if it has been able to do worksheets. One of the things it does really well with in English is if you base it off of a story, you do give it a little prompt. If you upload through Google Classroom, that's kind of an auto prompt based on the description that you've put in for
Mm-hmm.
your students.
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, a story by Ray Bradbury, like The Pedestrian, we came up with 20 questions or so that our students were doing in class. It was extremely accurate off of that because it has read The Pedestrian and it knows the answers. And so it can tell if the student really was able to grasp that text or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think you're fairly describing what I think is a common experience of people that have, tried to play around with AI tools and sort of this, how it provides critique for, fill in the blank. So essays, increasingly it's doing a great job for math equations and things like that. I've seen, people give good results. In my college, we have a school of visual communication. So photography, graphic design, where students are doing creative work. And so if you ask AI tools, various ones, to say, take this poster design and evaluate it, it will do so. But it wouldn't do that in the same way that a teacher would with that eye. Now it will at some point, but it will give you things like, like example, this poster is created in the style of Gothic, or, something really sort of generic like that, but getting to sort of, was the font that they used in a family that is commensurate with the visual theme. Maybe it's harder for it to be that specific. I think that's an interesting thing to watch with AI. Having taught a lot of public speaking classes, I think watching AI tools as to how it evaluates spoken language, which it's not far off. It's not far off, but probably not at the same level as it does written. So I think all those things will be interesting to watch moving forward. Kind of the last question I have for you, excuse me. As a CEO, you have to think about where the hockey puck is going. And you've already alluded to some things that you're working on this summer, but as a teacher and a CEO of a tech company, where do you see all of this going in the next handful of years? I think thinking too far out is sort of too much guesswork and something that's changing so rapidly. But, where does all this end up in 5 years in your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think more than anything, I can't help but always think about my personal app. And one of the things that I think about a lot is when I go to expand this, I want to be able to make this a full teacher tool. And along with that, I also want to make sure that it can help teachers prepare, not only once the product is done in that writing piece, but I want to build in a way for you to plan out your entire lesson or possibly even your entire unit with this tool.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned standards earlier. It would be somewhat based around that, where you might be creating that summative assessment and using this tool to grade it, but you're also using those formative assessments along the way. And so to go back to your question completely, I think that these tools are just going to continue to get more specific and more helpful. And that's one of my goals. I think a lot of the AI tools out there do a lot of different things, but they're not always extremely helpful to the teacher on a daily basis. It might be cool. Or it might be something that like you look at and you're like, wow, that's crazy, but it doesn't help you on a daily basis. And so my goal when creating this app was to specifically help teachers on a daily basis. And so like we talked about, as these AI models get better, I think that's only going to become easier, and more tools are going to be built in that are so specific to teachers that some of those things that we were accustomed to doing on a daily basis are just going to kind of go to the wayside.
Yeah. And importantly, when that happens, does that give us more time for relationship building and, having more one-on-one time with students, which we know is something that is so impactful and darn near impossible to do right now. So I agree with that. Well, Mike, it's been great to get to meet you, and I just want to commend you because the whole time that you've been talking, and it's apparent and other stuff that I've seen on your website, you really are taking a teacher focus on this for the right reasons, and that's exciting. And so for listeners and viewers of the podcast, we'll have a link to A+Minds, the website, so you can go check it out. And of course, there's contact information on there if you want to find out more information from Mike and I'm going to say team, and you can get more information from them if you would like that. But it's been great to meet you, and congratulations on jumping into this field with something that seems really practical and useful.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening to Teaching Matters. This is the last episode for the school year 24-25. We'll take a few months over the summer, as we all will, to recharge and start up again in August or September. So keep an eye out for that. After you listen to this episode with Mike, if you've not listened to the other episodes, it can be your reading list or your listening list over the summer as you're on a beach or on a lake or wherever you spend your time to recharge. We want to thank you for listening, and also special thanks throughout the entire year for our associate producers, April Koska and Trinity Sweet, who really do all the behind-the-scenes things to make this work. We hope that everyone has a restful summer, and we look forward to seeing you when we start the new season sometime in August or September. So take care, everyone.